Some sounds you can never forget, especially in a silent movie. 360 degrees of real. A bird's eye view on top of a roof where my eyes were only focused on the streets below, littered with rubble, Marine Corps camouflage soaked with tears, sweat, and blood. Breaking through the barrier of silence was something unfamiliar. It drove me to the edge of the roof where I was greeted by hate, love, life, and death. I was greeted by 12-year-old Sonia with her hand extended out, holding her baby brother close to her side. Bloody and battered, their innocence echoed through their loving mother's cries. Her tears shedded deep from her heart. Sounds of her heart tearing apart penetrated my body, my heart, imprinted in my mind forever. These are the sounds that you never forget. This was war, combat, complete disregard for human life. This was our reality. This is what my recruiter never told me about. January 23rd, 2010, I was haunted by humanity. See, several Marines bled that day, but everyone there was wounded. Just because you couldn't see the wound doesn't mean it wasn't there. Not all wounds can be healed by pressure dressing and stitches from our corpsman, Doc G. See, initiation to warriorhood is conditioning to adapt and overcome. See, at birth, we're all given a toolbox. It's empty. But throughout life, experiences, environments, and conditions, we develop skills, tools, some we use more than often. See, my tools were a conditioning of 2,136 days of training, 712 days of training before I went to my first deployment in Iraq, and 10 days of transitioning to a warrior and civilian. 10 days to unlearn 2,136 days of training. Warriors are trained to kill, but we're not trained to deal with killing. See, coping wasn't one of our tools. My tool that I survived in Afghanistan was a mask that I bared. See, this mask was a mask of dehumanizing and disconnecting from everything I knew was true and real. See, the same mask that saved me in combat nearly came to my demise as I returned home. See, it internalized my hate and my anger towards myself. I was lucky. What took off my mask was the unconditional love and support of those around me. But not all as fortunate. See, warriorhood is a lifelong journey, and that journey doesn't end until the warrior itself becomes a healer. And that journey isn't always supported around society.
Welcome to the Don't Panic, We're All Going to Die podcast. What you just heard was an excerpt from a TED Talk given by today's guest, Drew Lucas. Drew is a former Marine infantryman who now spends his time in South America, where he writes and facilitates healing ceremonies for fellow veterans. In fact, this interview took place shortly after he returned from the jungle in Colombia, where he was assisting in a healing circle. This conversation was an eye-opening one for me and has forever changed my perspective on the nature of war, what it means to be a soldier, and what the adjustment to normal life is like after experiencing combat abroad. When you look at the state of the world today, specifically with Russia invading Ukraine, it's clear to me that these conversations are more important than ever, and I'm humbled that Drew was willing to have one with me. Drew is a smart and incredibly compassionate person, but he's also one of the most honest people I've met, and he doesn't pull any punches when it comes to sharing his experience. So just a disclaimer, this is a heavy episode and we deal with some sensitive topics, but his story is one that is worth telling and worth listening to. So I hope that you get just as much out of it as I did. Here's my conversation with Drew. All right, well, Drew, welcome to the Don't Panic, We're All Gonna Die podcast. I'm super excited to have you here. I've enjoyed every conversation we've ever had, but I'm really happy to be able to have a medium where I could kind of share your wisdom with other people, because I know that you have a lot of it. So I guess a good place to start off would just be maybe if you could just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your story, and then we could just kind of go from there.
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. I appreciate you extending the invite. Yeah, my name is Drew Lucas. I am a Marine Corps veteran, combat veteran, Iraq, Afghanistan, and worked in the veteran community for about 5-6 years. Worked in organizations teaching poetry to youth in detention centers as well throughout South LA and in high schools as well. So yeah, I've just been walking this path, and here I am in Colombia in the Andes, and continuing that, adding to my toolkit, trying to bring everything I need to be, and bring the medicine that I've learned that helped me to other veterans as well.
Oh, that's awesome, man. Thanks for the introduction. So I guess maybe a good place to start would be, why did you enlist in the Marine Corps specifically? Because I know there's a bunch of different branches of the military. What drew you to the Marines specifically? And then why did you want to enlist in the military in the first place?
Yeah, that's an important question. I appreciate that, because everyone's why is different. So the Marine Corps, first, I was thinking about joining the Army. And then after a little bit of research, found the Marine Corps to be a better fit. First to fight, few the proud, honor, courage, commitment. It just attracted me. It attracted me. And I would say the reason would be I was a troubled young man, I would say. I was running around with, a crowd of people that wasn't doing anything good for me. Running around, I was selling drugs, robbing people. I get caught up with the wrong people. And it was to a point where I saw a lot of my friends were going to jail. People were getting shot. So it kind of was a fork in the road for me. It was a fork in the road, and I needed to do better for myself, for my future. And I wanted to help people. We'll get into it later as far as like helping people in the Marine Corps. But that was the idea. That was what I wanted to do. That's how I felt. I wanted to do good. And I felt that the Marine Corps, the military would be a good option.
Mm-hmm. And so I guess then you're living a life where you feel like maybe you could be a better person if you would have joined the military. How did the conversation with your family go?
Yeah, it was good. I think I've always been supported by my mom and my stepfather at the time. My stepfather was a bit hesitant. He was a child soldier in Lebanon, in Beirut. So he knew combat. So he was hesitant. He didn't really want me to go at all. But my mother was supportive. My family was supportive in general. I had 2 younger sisters, and they knew I wanted to do better. They knew where I've been the past 3 or 4 years of my life. So they were supporting me. They knew what I wanted to do, and they were fully behind me.
Great. Well, I imagine that that's really helpful, right? And if you're making a big choice as big as going to the military, having your family support, I mean, that must be kind of key in some ways.
Yeah, it definitely was. I know other people's families, when I went to boot camp, weren't supporting them as much, but eventually they came around. But always having that support is always essential to success in a way.
Mm.
Yeah.
So you do the boot camp, you do the training. How long do you train for, and what does the boot camp look like for Marines?
Yeah, the training is 3 months. The training is 3 months. There's phases, 3 phases. Kind of breaking everything down you've known before. Once you arrive, you don't sleep for the first 2-3 days. It's the first time a lot of people have been away from home. I joined when I was a little bit older, so I joined when I was 20 years old, compared to like 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, and I had a lot of life experience at that point already. So, and also just growing up in a household where I was getting yelled at a lot, so it really didn't bother me at all. I was immediately like a leader in boot camp, just because it didn't really affect me. Kind of just laughed at it. And so yeah, there's 3 phases, kind of breaking you down: lack of sleep, physical training, and then the second or third phase, you get into marksmanship, you get into like close quarters combat, and eventually graduation comes before you know it, because it's a routine. You're up at 4:30 in the morning every day. You're training. You have a schedule, and you're sleeping early, and it goes by quite fast.
And then so you go through the training, the boot camp, the 3 months, and then after that, how does it work? I mean, do you go home for a little bit and then wait to be deployed, or is it kind of immediate?
Yeah, so you'll have a week or two off. I'm not sure exactly how long it was, but from there you'll go to your specialty training school. Whether you're in the infantry or you have another job. I went to infantry training school,
Mhm.
and from there it's another 8 to 12 weeks, I believe. And from there you're sharpening your tools to what it is you're doing, whether that's infantryman, rifleman, eventually someone becomes a squad leader, whatever it may be. You're just sharpening your tools, and then from there you'll go into the fleet, into your unit. You'll enter your unit from there.
Got it. And you
Yeah.
were infantry?
Yeah, I was infantry.
Got it. So you go through the first training, you go through the second round of training, then you get deployed to your fleet. So where was your first? So how many tours did you do? Then
I did
where
two.
did you? Okay.
I did two. Yeah, I did two deployments. 2008, I was in Iraq, the Anbar province, and then from there, got back. I was home for maybe 5 or 6 months, and actually volunteered to go to Afghanistan. From there, yeah, and then Afghanistan 2009 to 2010.
Got it.
Yeah.
And so that's interesting. And what, I guess, because I'm pretty unfamiliar with a lot of this stuff, what defines a tour?
Pretty much it's military needs. So your tour can be 6 months, it could be 9 months. Usually for the Marine Corps, it's between 6 and 9 months. So it also can be in non-combat area. It could be in different Kyrgyzstan if you're in the Air Force. It could be all around the world. It doesn't have to be combat theater. So it really depends what your job is, what the needs of the military are.
Got it. So so your first tour is in Iraq, and then you went to Afghanistan. So I maybe veering off the military path for just a moment, and we'll come back to it. But I'm just kind of curious. Most people in their lives will probably never go to Iraq or Afghanistan. So I'm curious, what is something that stuck out to you about being there? Maybe the differences between, being in America or somewhere in the West and Afghanistan. I'd be curious to know, like, from maybe a geological perspective, and then also like from a people perspective.
Iraq and Afghanistan both are interesting places. When I was in Iraq, I was in an abandoned train station for most of the time. And while I was there, we were doing interdiction ops. So we were just kind of running on the Syrian border, stopping people coming into bigger towns, joining the fight, the Al Qaeda, whoever the enemy was at the time. Yeah, the weather's harsh in the areas we were at. The infrastructure wasn't there was no infrastructure. And the living is a lot of the times could be nomadic. It can be, the people really just want to they want security just to live and farm. As far as our presence there, it depended where you're at, really, whether they are indifferent from you, whether they welcomed you, or whether they really didn't want you there, in their country at all. So it's very different. But from the States, of course, we have what we have as far as our infrastructure, our society, our culture, way of thinking. After high school, we go to college, or we go get a job, a 9 to 5. My experience in Iraq and Afghanistan, a lot of the times, was the support of family. That was the most important thing. Whether they're farmers, and most of them were where I was. So that was, kids are working until they're 6 years old. So it's not much of the American dream is the American dream,
right?
So it's different aspirations, right? Different cultures, different aspirations. So yeah, that's the gist of it from what I felt when I was over in Iraq and Afghanistan. The differences.
Got it.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you were in an abandoned train station, which is not something I would have expected. What does a day-to-day look like for you while you're over there?
Yeah, it depends. We had cycles a week at a time. 1 week you would be out from day 1 to day 8 or 7, running operations along the border, or looking for caches. We did a lot of that in Iraq, looking for caches.
What's a cache?
I'm sorry, yeah, cache would be a stockpile of ammunitions, rockets, small arms. So we did a lot of that in Iraq. Also looking for high value targets as well. So that'll be a week straight, just operations. Then you have a week of security on base. You just really, you're just posting security. You're posting security, 24-hour duties, as far as like you'll be on stand for 24 hours, then 24 hours rest. The other week would be just the downtime for maintenance, weapons, vehicles, and rest. So that was like what life was in Iraq, and that was 2008. So it was a long time ago, but that was the gist of my Iraq deployment. Wasn't very kinetic in terms of combat in my experience. And I think that's why, to be honest with you, I volunteered to go to Afghanistan. I think I was, to be completely honest, I was seeking glory a little bit, just being trained and instilled as a Marine, and wanting to do what I was trained to do. So right. I think that's why I raised my hand to go to Afghanistan.
Got it. And you didn't have to go. You went on a voluntary basis.
I went on a voluntary basis. Some people were deployed out of my unit. We got augmented to another unit that was deploying. So I didn't have to go, but there was a number of people that did.
Got it. And I guess what's kind of, just speaking as somebody who has not served in the military, I think a lot of people maybe group them together. Iraq and Afghanistan, they maybe see them as the same thing in a lot of ways. Curious to hear from you what the differences were, because you did the first tour in Iraq, and then you go to Afghanistan. I imagine those experiences were drastically different.
Yeah, they were very, very different. And when I said Iraq didn't have infrastructure, it did compared to Afghanistan, as far as where we were living, where we were staying. For example, the majority of my unit, when we arrived in Afghanistan, I was part of the surge of troops. It was like 40,000 or 60,000 extra troops in 2009. So when we arrived in Afghanistan, majority of my unit were based out of a castle that Alexander the Great built.
Oh, whoa.
In the Gamshir district. Yeah. So I was only there for a day, but it was really amazing to see. Just the walls are still standing. So they were running operations out there. It was headquarters. And from there, I was only there a day, and we were opted out to Combat Outpost Shabu. So that was another maybe 8 miles west of where we're at, along the Gamshir district, along the Helmand River. So it was in Helmand province. Yeah, so we lived out of a house, of an Afghan house, with a mud wall surrounding it in the middle of a village. It was just 20, maybe 30 of us, plus 30 of us, including Afghan National Army. So yeah, we once we arrived, we had to fortify. We were filling sandbags right when we got there. The place we took over was from a previous unit. There's a big IED blast in the wall, and a Marine was killed taking over the compound, because it used to be a Taliban stronghold.
Right.
So that's where we were living out of. So that's that's just the bare minimum as far as differences arriving like on site, and then like, okay, this is where we're going. And it's interesting, man. It's interesting to see when we arrived. I still remember the faces of the guys we were replacing. Just looked hopeless. The look of hopelessness and just saying good luck to us just looked like they were beaten down a lot.
And how long had they been there before you arrived?
They're there just about 7 months, I believe.
Okay. And is that pretty average to be based in a single location?
Yeah, it is pretty. It really depends, because it was a push. It was a push to clear. We're the most southwestern unit in Afghanistan at the time. So yeah, that is pretty basic as far as the time allowed someone to be there.
Got it. And then you mentioned when you were in Iraq, being stationed in a train station, looking for caches, high quality targets, and then doing ops like that. Was Afghanistan doing the same things, or were did the jobs differ?
No, the jobs definitely differed. It was all foot patrols in Afghanistan. I believe our mission was to provide security for the local village, also to push further west, and we can get into that a little bit further, to clear a marketplace that was a Taliban stronghold and also like a radio station they had set up there. So yeah, that was our mission, to hold in place and eventually push further west to doing clearing ops.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I, just kind of following your path, you mentioned teaching poetry and doing poetry, and you're a really talented speaker. Like for listeners, Drew Lucas, type in Drew Lucas TED Talk, and it's incredible. I'll play a little bit of it at the beginning of this episode, but it's really great stuff. And I love how you are able to, like, I think that your poetry is kind of idiosyncratic. It's a little combination of music, little combination of spoken word, little combination of storytelling. But one of the ones I really enjoyed that you did was a song called Daylight, which was commemorating an event that happened on January 23rd, 2010. Would you mind elaborating on what happened that day?
Yeah, of course, Johnny. Yeah, so January 23rd was a day that definitely changed my life. Not just mine, but just a lot of people that were involved in that day. It was an initial push to a place called Zandakale Bazaar. It was a marketplace. And it was a big operation, helo inserts, route clearance. We faced little resistance initially on the first day. I think it was maybe January 20th that we inserted ourselves and cleared the bazaar, the marketplace, and little resistance. And because the Taliban heard that we were coming, so most of them, packed up and got out of there. But 3 days later, it was, I guess, I remember we were making coffee. Me and my team leader were making coffee. I still remember we were living out of a house right down from the marketplace, and we heard a big boom. We heard a big boom, and when you hear certain explosions, you really feel it inside your body. You feel it in your heart. And initially, the radio chatter was everyone was okay, nothing happened. But about 2 minutes later, we found out that we were hit. We weren't sure with what, but eventually we found out it was a suicide bomber. It was a person that had been actually helping us earlier on, giving us some guidance, and supposedly that the Taliban had held his children hostage pretty much, and pretty much gave him a suicide vest and told him to go blow up the Americans.
Wow.
We were the quick reaction force, the QRF, first on scene, my platoon, first platoon. And it was a scene, of something out of a movie, just what you would expect, the shambles, the smells. Yeah, it was ugly. I think what, that day really hit me hard, losing, we lost three men that day, two initially, and then one, David Smith, 3 days later. He succumbed to his wounds. But Jeremy Kane and Doc Zenchi died that day. And it was, I still remember before heading down to the bazaar, I heard people screaming about, like, grab the bags. And another person is screaming, like, what bags? He's like, what bags you think? Like, grab the bags, referring to body bags, and that's when, like, my heart kind of sank down. And then upon arriving on the scene, it was myself and my saw gunner, and we had hopped on a roof to provide security. And I'll never forget this, this moment where we're up on top of the roof, and I'm hearing this sound, Johnny. Like I wasn't sure what it was, and I'm like, "What is that sound?" I'm yelling down, like, "What is that sound? What is that sound?" And my team leader yells at it's the mother. He says, "The mother." I didn't know what that meant, and I crawled to the edge of the roof, and I saw two kids, that died, and their mother, just on top of them, kind of screaming. Like it's a sound like, I guess the only way I would describe it is a sound of a heartbreak, like literally physically in the moment hearing a heartbreak. So I think that moment stayed with me forever, and her screams, so yeah, that was the most difficult part, losing two brothers, three brothers eventually, but losing our brothers, seeing those kids. And yeah, but you know what, I've learned to change my relationship with the experience. But that was the kinetic atmosphere of Afghanistan at the time and where we were at.
Right.
So yeah.
Well, I can't even imagine what that must have been like. But I really appreciate you being willing to share, and I think that your story is very important for people to hear. I think it's through stories like yours and people sharing them that we were able to understand what war is. If that makes sense. Yeah. And I think even in your TED talk, you mentioned that like war is something that needs to be discussed. I just think it's so important that to hear your perspective on this, because it's just so important, especially when you see these things happening in like Ukraine right now. It just reminds you of what's actually happening, because it feels like you can be so far away a lot of the time, especially if you're in America. Yeah, war is a terrible thing.
There's no winners. There's like no one's right in war. It's like something I've heard before, that no one's right. It's only war never shows who's right, only who is left, and we all want the same thing as humans. We just want peace and love, and to see our kids grow up and love our family members, and we are far attached from it in the States, but everyone is fighting their own battles. But when it comes to your streets blowing up and bombs, you're sleeping one second and then the bomb blows up in your house, so
I really like that. They're like, there are no winners and everyone wants the same thing. Is that a perspective that you have now, maybe have a few years out of it looking back, or is that something that a conclusion that you came to while you were there?
Yeah, man, I definitely think it was a thought there, but it's definitely a conclusion after 10 years later. And I'll share with you, I think why it's a thought there, what I realized some of what we were fighting in Afghanistan were just kids, just farmers and children, pretty much, seeing some of the supposed ruthless Taliban fighters, some are just kids needing money. I'm not saying, this isn't me saying there isn't ruthless like Taliban fighters. Of course there is, but some of it is just, the circumstances of the country and needing to provide for themselves. That's war in general. I feel like that might be similar to what's happening around the world. People just need, survive. So
yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
And so then you served. How long did you serve for? So how long did that tour last? That was in 2010, and then when did you come back?
Yeah, that was in 2010 or 2019. I came back in 2010. I think in the summertime, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe in the summertime.
Okay. And so what was the transition to civilian life for you? What challenges were there? And then were there any of those that surprised you?
Yeah. Yeah, John, I would say, Afghanistan was really, really tough. It was really tough, but I didn't realize what was on the horizon for me, like the challenge of coming home. That was my hardest war I fought, in Afghanistan. It was pretty tough, so I think that says a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, just when I remember coming home and getting out and I'm sitting in a college classroom. It was like, this was back in Maryland. I hadn't moved to Los Angeles yet, but yeah, I'm just sitting there and I'm hearing all these things. I'm seeing things. Like the cries of that mother like stuck with me for years. I'll just be sitting in class and I have to leave. I'll go have a panic attack, come back. I didn't sleep with the lights off for 2 years when I got back.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll share with you part of like why that reason is. Like I'm pretty open book. I'm a pretty open book and just kind of want to share my experiences. I think it's important.
It is.
Yeah, right. So I had before January 23rd, I was involved in I was involved in an IED attack. So I was blown up, lost some of my hearing, knocked unconscious, but I walked away. I was fine. I was fine. But maybe like 2 weeks later, there's some Afghanistan Taliban soldiers were firing rockets at our combat outpost, and eventually one of our fire teams ran right into them, and they killed them. They killed these two Taliban fighters, and my fire team was tasked out to carry, for some reason, I'm not sure why, but it came down from higher. We had to carry their bodies in the middle of the night for like 3-4 hours. And yeah, so, as Marines do, when you're put in certain circumstances, you do things to cope with the trauma, what's happening. We're kind of like laughing about carrying these bodies for hours, stumbling, falling in the mud, and like, oh, we're going to have PTSD for this. And, eventually, once we dropped the bodies back off at our cop, maybe a month later, I woke up screaming and the feeling of being choked, and seeing these two Taliban fighters over me. This is a month later, believe in what you want to believe in, but like, I guess their spirits like choking me. So that followed me home. Happened 4 or 5 times. They would only come to me at night. And so I couldn't sleep with the lights off for 2 years. I eventually did some work around it, a lot of work around it, and I've changed the relationship with these spirits. I know it might sound a little bit, out there in terms of like, oh, these spirits, I'm not sure, like, what everyone believes in, but, I kind of, my path onto my healing path, I've been involved in a lot of different ceremonies and ceremonies of ancient traditional ways. So yeah, I've changed the relationship to these spirits and have this relationship, with them to this day. So that was a really hard thing I was struggling with once I got home, carrying that guilt. And I only when I just got home, but for years later. So circling back to coming home, that was a big issue. Just seeing things, seeing people, still being in Afghanistan for so long, still being not physically in Afghanistan, but mentally and emotionally and spiritually in Afghanistan. Yeah, but it was really difficult, man. It was difficult because I didn't feel like anyone understood me. I didn't feel like anyone could understand me or had the ability to understand me, especially once I moved to LA and was trying to start this new life. And it was it was a challenge. It was a challenge.
I mean, that I really appreciate you sharing all this, Drew, because I think, like, I had a conversation with somebody on one of my first episodes named Jill Ringer. She had cancer, and she described the experience of having cancer as being, because she thought she was going to die. Like she was like lost so much weight. Her skin was pale, and she described the feeling as being like, I felt like I was on a raft and everybody I knew was on an island and I was just drifting away from them, and that nobody could possibly understand where I was. And I imagine that maybe it's kind of a similar feeling as what you went through. You're in a college class, you're seeing people goof off, and you're just like, these people could never understand where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
But I do think that the powerful thing about your story and the way that you're able to articulate it is that I still don't think like someone like me will ever be able to truly understand. But hearing your story, I understand the experience of not only you, but every other veteran I've ever met way more than I ever would have if I hadn't heard any of this.
That's
So
beautiful.
I think that what you're doing is a beautiful thing. And I have to say, we chatted a bit before this, and not knowing you like extremely well, I have to say it's a beautiful thing to see where you are in life. And I met you a few years ago, and it seems like you're even in a way better place now. And I'm just so happy and grateful for being able to have this conversation with you, but also just to see where you are, because it's really beautiful to just as soon as we connected, you had this giant smile on your face, and it makes me really happy to see it.
Thank you, Johnny. I appreciate that, man. Yeah, I appreciate you receiving like what I'm sharing right now too. That means a lot.
Of course.
And yeah, I don't think it's something that we expect, people to fully understand, but just receiving it with compassion is the most important thing. I think that's the most important thing for people to understand where veterans are and how they're coming back home. And and just seeing people receive what veterans share gives us hope, and that's the most important thing. That's the most important thing to connecting with our community and our inner self, and how we identify ourselves now, because that was a huge part of my healing journey. Is what am I now? I'm not just my service. I'm not just this Marine. I was a really good Marine, but what now? What now? Like we need this purpose, and purpose is the most important and not just veterans, for everyone, right?
Totally. You're onto something though with having a sense of purpose, and I imagine that you come back from a life experience like that with a very different view of what purpose probably means. But it sounds like you maybe have found purpose in acts of service, and especially acts of service towards veterans, and maybe helping them readjust to returning, because you mentioned yourself that transitioning back to civilian life was even more difficult than being in Afghanistan. So I think maybe I'd love to hear just about that experience. How have you been? You're an activist specifically for veterans, helping them adjust. How has that been for you, and what has that brought to your life?
Yeah, it's been an amazing journey. It's been an amazing journey. I think that's what gave me my breath of air. That's the first time I felt some sense of self after war and after the Marine Corps. I was deeply depressed once I got back. And once I moved to LA, I was attending a local community college. I was deeply depressed, struggling. And I realized Veterans Day was coming up, and I had never written poetry before, but I started journaling. I started writing just what I was thinking, just getting things out on paper. And I realized there was like an open mic. It was an open mic, and so I went and shared. What I had, and I remember the reaction. I was full of anger, full of rage, and it was a breath of fresh air. But at the same time, I saw the reaction of people's faces in the crowd. Like, wow, they saw like this man is in pain, and I was kind of almost embarrassed in a way. So I left the auditorium or whatever it may be, and I was sitting on a bench, and this guy came up to me. He's like, "Hey, man, everything you're doing right now, keep doing that, because that was real and that was powerful. So keep doing it." And that was, it was like me being witnessed. and that felt like, oh, someone has an understanding of where I'm at, and someone sees me, that was the most important thing. So from there, I got help organizing a Veteran Day tribute concert at the local community college. It's called Battle Class. So it was a health fair where I tabled vendors. It could be a health food store or yoga studios, different gyms. And also I found an organization called Street Poets, which 3-4 years later would become, I would be working with them. And what they did was teach poetry in detention centers and to cope with trauma. But that first event was beautiful. I went to the Veterans Affairs, had Vietnam vets come out. I had some friends in the music department, so music was like the platform. And then I would speak, and then I would share poetry. And that was the first day I was like, okay, I see the light. I see what I need to do now. Hope, exactly. And from there, my name got handed off to the Wounded Warriors Project and the Veterans Affairs. I would do suicide prevention events. Yeah, because I didn't share with you, but 3 days before I shared at that first open mic, it was like an everyday thought. I was driving around with my M4, like, yeah, I was still in Afghanistan, man. I was thinking about I wanted not only did I want to hurt myself, but I had thoughts of hurting other people just so they could understand where I was at. That's how far gone I was, man. That's how far gone I was. So me sharing that day was what I needed, to get a clear sight of some light and some fresh air to breathe a little bit more than I have been. So that's how I started. That's how I started, and it gave me everything I needed to arrive where I'm at today, man. And it's been a journey to look back. And despite the amount of work I've done, years later, I didn't know. That's the thing about combat trauma. Combat trauma is different than a lot of other trauma. It's Ed Tick is he's an author, and he's worked a lot with the Vietnam veterans and multiple different veterans, but talks of combat trauma being a soul wound because of things we've done or had done to us. And it's more of a spiritual wound, not only psychological, but it's more so it's a soul wound because we're dealing with those deep spaces.
Well, I guess the first thing I'd like to say is that, obviously just appreciate you sharing all this so much. And like, Drew, you are so real, man. Like not only in like this conversation, but like when that guy, who you felt witness to you came up and mentioned that to you, that, and that made you feel seen. One thing that stuck out to me is that you mentioned that the most important thing for you was to find hope, right? When you came back. And I think like through your story and through your art, I think you're able to give people that. I don't think it's exclusive to veterans, but I think it's especially for veterans. I think when I imagined, and I'm sure that you probably received this feedback. I'm willing to bet that, through your experience and through your sharing and through your sincerity, I think other people are able to maybe see the light themselves. I think that's such a beautiful thing about what you're doing and the acts of service that you're able to provide. And you mentioned a soul wound and combat trauma being a more spiritual trauma. And I know that recently, you mentioned doing some ancient ceremonies. And I know that right now you're based in Colombia, kind of participating and facilitating those types of things. So I would love to hear about maybe your spiritual journey and maybe some of the methods that you've used to heal yourself.
Yeah. It's been a full circle. I've learned that you need to not only just being a patient opposed to being a participant in your own healing journey. If you're only just a patient, it kind of segregates you from the community and well-being and you lack hope if you're not also a participant. And the way I did that, like started writing. I started writing and started the event called Battle Class I was doing every year.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the start of it. And then what brought me down here, and I'll be honest with you, I thought after a long time of all the work I've been doing with street poets and that community and that job was essential to helping me on my healing journey. So street poets talked a lot about witnessing and rituals, and I don't want to get too much off track, but ancient warrior societies, the way they would welcome home communities, they would really carry them back into their village, and they would have purification ceremonies so that the burden of trauma wouldn't just be on the warrior. The whole community would take it on through like certain rituals and ceremonies. So street poets first introduced me that was my first like really healing, opposed to the poetry and the witnessing that I've been doing previously, but also retreats in the Mendocino Forest, in the Redwood Forest. That was one of the most powerful experiences I've had. They do a men's group of 80 men, all sit in this log cabin, deep in the woods. They've been going on for like 60, 70 years while ancient stories are being played on the drums. And what you have to do is find yourself in this story, find your truth. So it gets to a point where you don't speak until it's something that so overbearing that you have to stand up and speak your truth. And I still remember the day, like it was so intense. What happened to me is like something happened and I stood up, and I remember saying that January 23rd, my unit was attacked by a suicide bomber, and a lot of people died that day, and it changed my life forever. But I go into explaining where I stood at that time, where I'm at now, but I've learned to take all my experiences and turning that pain into different possibilities. So that was the first introduction into like spiritual healing. But why I came down here, Johnny, was despite all the work I've done before that, and why I left LA is doing the work with street poets. I was, there's a lot of circumstances, you're working with youth, and youth with that are in the streets, gang members or whatever have you, it's a beautiful community. But with me still, I realized one day when a young man came into the office late at night, I was with a female colleague, and he is talking about how he always carries a gun, and he was shooting at someone last week. And I was triggered. I was triggered to the point where in my head, I had like jumped across the table and like killed this guy like 3 times with like a pen, and just, I was so triggered, man. And I was like wanting to defend my female colleague. And this is the mindset of where I was at. And he didn't end up being a threat. I actually gave him a ride home, gave him a few dollars, but after, as soon as I dropped him off, I broke down and started crying. And I called someone, and, and just kind of explained to him what happened. And I remember explaining to this person, and, this person was like, wow, like, whoa, like the silence of fear, I guess, the silence of fear of not understanding where I was at, and me crying. And it was really going through it, man. It was very difficult for me, but I realized that a part of me still needed to die. Like this warrior part of me needed to die, because in that type of work, you have to walk with your heart always, and to be open with your heart always. And despite all the work I've done over the years, I still had that warrior part in me. And I realized I wasn't serving my community as the best way I could. So I realized I needed to step away. I needed to step away from that work. So that happened. And then a few days later, I Yeah, I'll just be, I went through a breakup. It was all during the same like kind of time period.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't sleeping for days. And I was triggered back to January 23rd. And I blacked out, and I found myself climbing the roof to my apartment in my underwear, thinking I was back in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
So the heartbreak of the breakup with an ex-partner who just didn't have the abilities to support me in certain situations took me back to January 23rd, where my heart was broken before. The first time my heart was broken. So I flipped back to that day, and I found myself in my underwear outside trying to climb the roof, because that's where I went. So despite, all that work I did over years, I thought, I was doing everything I thought I needed to be doing. I realized that, I needed to get away and take care of myself. So, and I found myself down here. So that's part of my like spiritual healing and journey. From there, I went down to Guadalajara in Mexico. She was like a healer within the street poets community, and worked with her up in the mountains for a while, just doing some energy healing, stuff like that. And then was there for about a month, and then found my way down here, and ran into, found this retreat center that used like the medicines of America to it was a retreat center not just for veterans but for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So to circle back and to answer your question, it's been a long journey. It's been a long journey of ups and downs, but the most important thing is constantly taking a step forward and constantly doing everything you need to be doing. I feel a responsibility because I've been so fortunate to come across so many people and communities that I'm adding to my toolkit to one day, very soon, start my own organization connecting veterans with medicines down here. So I feel a responsibility because I've been through all these things, and I've even though I've gotten to a point where I thought I was ready to go, and I've been all clear with my trauma in Afghanistan, but I learned that 2.5 years ago, 2019 is when I left LA. That there's always more work to be done. It's repetitive actions. It's reoccurring actions. It's constantly working, clearing yourself, clearing your mind. Just like we exercise, all the time. We brush our teeth all the time. It's recurring actions to keep your soul aligned, to heal yourself. It's never stops. It's a long life. It's a lifetime journey.
I like that, the reoccurring actions, and then just consistently trying to take a step forward. But it sounds like you're doing that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think I love that it's like your version of moving a step forward is by helping others move forward too. I think that's really powerful. And yeah, man, I really admire you.
Thank you, bro. I appreciate it, man.
I hope to one day be as open and honest as you are. And I appreciate you so much having this conversation with me. I don't think I'm ever going to look at Veterans Day the same again after having had this conversation with you. But I hope that in whatever way that man who came up to you and said he appreciated your words, made you feel seen, I hope you feel seen by me. Man, I just feel like this is one of those conversations that's probably just going to stick with me until the day I die. So I'm just honored that you're willing to have it with me, man.
No, I appreciate that, man. I appreciate you saying that. And it's also, it's you're extending your invite to have me on and have this conversation with you. Is that's what we all need. That's what veterans need. And it's an honor for me to be here with you and have this conversation, because that's what heals us all. I think us having conversations and learning from each other and that's the most important thing, man. We're all in this together. So
yeah,
we should act like it,
Yeah, I totally agree. And I like that you said that it's towards the beginning of the conversation, you said that like compassion is just the most important thing in listening. And I think that's it's very applicable to all areas of life. You know, whatever somebody's struggling with, I think just being able to understand how to apply compassion in all interactions, I think is so important. And like you said, you know, we are all in this together, and we're all made of the same stuff. We're all made of the same stardust. So.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I did want to ask you one last question, which was if you could just snap your fingers and give civilians one perspective or a sense of understanding about veterans, what would it be?
That's a great question. I would say it's hard to put it in one, but I would say that we are proud of our service. We are proud of our service, but we want to be more proud of what we are today. We want to be more proud of what we're doing today than the experiences that have happened to us. That, you know, our resiliency is not just in war, but our resiliency is how we come back home and help our community. And we want to be recognized that way and supported. And the only way that happens is things like this, having these conversations and us helping each other. You know, I would join the Marine Corps because I wanted to help people. I don't feel like I helped people when I was overseas, but I've devoted my life after to help people, not just veterans, but everyone that comes down here to retreat center, the wellness center I'm working with, you know, holding those spaces. It's taken a lot of violence to be as gentle that I am today. So I take a lot of pride in people's reactions on their faces when I do tell them my stories, because some people say, "Oh, I would never think you've been through that," and that makes me really proud of myself. Yeah,
that's such a great answer.
Yeah,
yeah, I love that. I'm just trying to process it. But yeah, I think you should be proud of who you are today, man. Because I think you're a great person, and I think what you're doing is just so necessary for a lot of people. And I know that you have the power to change people's lives with your story, and you know the way that you're using your experiences to help other people is just it's real beautiful. And once again, just really appreciate you spending some time talking to me today. And yeah, man, this has been very eye-opening for me, and I'm honored. So thank you for your service, and I'm proud of you. And
I appreciate it a lot, Johnny. I really do, man. I think this is for me, it's been a while since I've spoken on a platform like this. So I just been kind of putting in the work recently, the past year and a half. So it really ignites me as well. It reminds myself of how far I've come and where I'm at now. And that's because of you and your platform and this podcast. So I really appreciate you, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, man. That means so much to me, more than I could probably express with words. If you enjoyed this conversation and would like to donate to the group Drew is working with, please consider doing so. It's called the Heroic Hearts Project, and I'll put the link in the description for this episode. If you'd like to stay connected and receive news on future episodes of the podcast, feel free to follow me on social media at Here's Johnny Nava. And last of all, I thought an appropriate way to close out this podcast would be to play Daylight, which is the song written by Drew, inspired by the events that took place on January 23rd, 2010. Until next time.
Daylight, come in, I just wanna go home. I said daylight, come in, I just wanna go home. I just wanna go home. Daylight, come in, I just wanna go home.
This is where the heart is. Hardens hit after hit after hit. Never broken, only bruising to get better. It takes forever. to make love to a man that hates himself. I wonder what lifetime we on now.
Gentle, be gentle with yourself. Gentle with yourself.
Be gentle with myself. A young rage man, a wounded warrior wanders in the past. I don't know her. She brought me here cross-legged on the mat, head hugged the ground, respect. Mother of wisdom, mother of mysteries. Her hand holds my heart. There's holes inside of you. You must forgive yourself. Parts of your soul still wander in the past. Fill these holes with love.
Come in.
It's no easy
I just
task.
wanna go home. I said daylight.
Just wanna
Come in, come in.
I just wanna go.
I just wanna go home. I just wanna go
Just
home.
wanna go home.
Daylight, come and take me home.
Relationships with ancestors lead to sacred lands, but I'm still bleeding. A trail from Marrakesh, Babylon to Arame, Grandma Urumu, Ethiopian strong. Wonder if she could see her only grandson across the Red Sea, thirsty for blood where her name began. I didn't know it was my ancestors' land. Maybe that's why this soul wound cares for me more. Thought about that martyr, suicide bomber, little boy and girl carried my name and I'm the one to blame. Initiated priestess, tears. I never met her before. I collected them, lined my windows and doors. You must ride out the darkness to ride out the darkness. Stay hopeful. Keep practicing. I'm praying for you.
Come in
Always.
and take me home. I said daylight, come in, come in, come in. I just wanna go home. I just wanna go home. I just wanna go